Okay, we're live.
Hachiakoke. Thank you all for joining us today. Sahoshifoyat Aimee Roberson, Chata Micha Chikasha Ohoyo Sia. My name is Aimee Roberson, and I am a Choctaw and Chickasaw woman. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Executive Director of Cultural Survival. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the panelists and the audience who've joined us today. Thank you for being here. First, we have a bit of housekeeping, some things that will be good for you to know before we get started. So interpretation is available in English and Spanish. To access the interpretation, click on the world or globe icon in the bottom navigation bar to choose your language. Hay interpretación disponible en inglés y español. Para acceder a la interpretación, haga clic en el icono del mundo en la barra de navegación inferior para elegir su idioma. This event is being live streamed on Cultural Survival's Facebook page and YouTube page. It is being recorded and will be posted later on www.cs.org and as well on our YouTube page. So you can watch it again or share it for those who were unable to attend. If you would like to support this webinar and the work of Cultural Survival, you can make a donation at cs.org/donate so we can continue organizing these webinars. A question and answer will take place at the end of the presentations if time presents. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask your questions, and hopefully we'll have time to be able to get to them. And of course, please feel free to introduce yourselves, as many people already are in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. This webinar is organized by Cultural Survival. For those of you who are with us for the first time, we are an Indigenous-led nonprofit organization based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States. We have been working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples to protect and defend their rights and support their self-determination, cultures, and political resilience since 1972. Cultural Survival envisions a future that respects and honors the inherent rights and dynamic cultures of Indigenous peoples, deeply and richly interwoven in lands, languages, spiritual traditions, and artistic expressions rooted in self-determination and self-governance. We do this through a five-pronged approach: grant-making, advocacy, capacity building, Indigenous livelihoods, and communications. So thanks again to our panelists whose stories are featured in the Cultural Survival Quarterly or who have collaborated with us in other ways. If you have not yet had a chance to read their stories, I invite you to do so. We'll be sharing links to those in the chat. Indigenous foodways and our kinship with plants, animals, and ecosystems are central to Indigenous resilience and regenerative lifeways, and informed by our cosmovisions, knowledge systems, and languages. Passed down through generations, traditional practices, foods, and materials are embedded within relational webs of human and more than human beings, flows, and entities, all fundamental to sustaining our lives, communities, and cultures. Indigenous peoples have resisted the harm and disruption of colonialism and extractive capitalism by reinforcing our cultures and core values, including relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution. We are building strong movements to revitalize our communities and foodways and rekindle kinship, knowledge, and trade routes that contribute to the web of life. The deep wisdom that emerges from continuously honoring our sacred kinship with Mother Earth and each other is key to cultivating balance and addressing some of today's greatest challenges, including climate change. We've invited our panelists to join us here today to discuss these topics. I'm going to briefly introduce them, then we'll jump into the discussion. First, I'll introduce Chenae Bullock, LPIM. She is a Shinnecock Native Shinnecock Nation citizen and descendant of the Montauk people. She's nationally recognized through features in South by Southwest, Forbes, Rolling Stone, TEDx, Bloomberg, Condé Nast Traveler, Indian Country Today, and more. As founder and CEO of Moskehtu Consulting, she leads cultural and heritage preservation initiatives rooted in the ancestral traditions of her coastal whaling village. Welcome, Chenae. We're so happy to have you here with us. Mónica Rattling Hawk is a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation, an aspiring Unchi grandmother, and resides on Quiver Hill, the northeast corner of the Pine Ridge Reservation, where she happily toils in the soil, harvesting medicines, and enjoys the challenges of walking in two worlds. Walking a journey of discovering traditional knowledge and ecosystem relationships from an Indigenous perspective, Mónica is also an advocate of the Buffalo Treaty and has brought the Oglala Sioux tribe to be a signatory and continues as a working group member tackling issues impacting tribes and buffalo relatives. Mónica works with her community, bringing forth education on food as medicine to the community through education in planting, harvesting, and preserving foods. Welcome, Mónica. Thanks again for joining us. Next, we have Francisco Gutiérrez Alvarez, who was born in Huaquitepec, Chilón, Chiapas. I hope I'm not saying that wrong. You can correct me, Francisco, and is a Tseltal Maya speaker and specialist in organic coffee production. He has worked in agriculture since childhood, promoting sustainable farming, soil conservation, and reforestation. He holds a bachelor's degree in rural development planning from CESTER. He has shared his experience in Japan and recently in a gathering with cultural survival and the Indigenous Resilience Center from the University of Arizona in Yucatan, Mexico. We were there together in January. And since 2007, he has served as internal control system manager at Yomol Atel in Chilón, Chiapas. Welcome, Francisco. Thanks for being with us. And finally, Ian Thompson. Ian serves as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. He has worked in Choctaw cultural preservation since his youth. Ian and his wife, Aimee, manage Nanawaye Farm, an enterprise dedicated to revitalizing land-based Choctaw traditional culture, particularly Indigenous Choctaw food. In 2024, the farm was recognized as a natural heritage area by the state of Oklahoma. Congratulations on that, Ian. And Ian is past president of the Oklahoma Bison Association, a registered professional archaeologist, and a tribal council certified Choctaw community language and culture instructor. Welcome, Ian. Thanks again for being with us. All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our questions. The time is always too short on these webinars, so we're going to talk about a few things and hopefully get to some questions and answers from the audience too. So I'm going to start with Mónica. Mónica, what are the ways that you, your family, community, and your nation are working toward food sovereignty?
I think, one of the first things I wanted to share is, just as a community, as a people, as family, we had to really define what food sovereignty was to us. What does that mean? And today and how we live and the space that we occupy. And one of the things I can think about in sharing that is I was growing some food and had started by trading for some seeds from another Indigenous community, and they were peppers. And I took those peppers and harvested them, and I was keeping my nephews at that time. And I said, dear boys, I'm going to take these seeds and these plants or this fruit, and we're going to cut it and we're going to put these seeds out, and then I'm going to have you put them on a paper plate, and then we're going to dry them. and we're going to save those seeds. And they said, gee, Auntie, why do you want to do that? We can just go to the store and buy those anytime we want. And I said, because what it is if anything should happen, nobody can take away this knowledge from us. Nobody can take away these seeds from us. We'll be prepared and we will have food sovereignty. We'll be sovereign and we'll be able to grow another season of this fruit, and we'll be able to again save seeds, and we'll just continue on that way, and we'll be dependent or independent, and we won't have to depend on anybody. So, that was what we had to do first, was really define what food sovereignty was to us and why it was important. And so our community, and I guess we'll refer to it as the Pine Ridge Reservation, is taking on a pretty big, significant food sovereignty piece in terms of growing our own foods, but it's also knowing those traditional foods that grow wild, such as our chokecherry and our plums and our chimsila and stuff, and really knowing when the medicines and the right time is to harvest and how to harvest and stuff. So, and then how to preserve like our ancestors did. And so that's what we have really defined as food sovereignty in our communities. And it's a growing movement, and it's really exciting to see the young ones take a lot of that ancestral knowledge and apply it.
That's so beautiful, Mónica. Thank you for sharing. Next, we're going to go to Francisco. Having worked in agriculture since childhood, promoting sustainable farming, soil conservation, and reforestation, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you would like to share with us?
Lo importante para mí son enseñanzas ancestrales, desde mi abuelo, abuela. Me han transmitido esta experiencia de trabajar y cultivar la tierra. Desde niño, pues igual me gustaba trabajar en el campo, producir maíz, café, frijol. También, pues lo importante es cuidar la fertilidad del suelo, porque cada año producimos. Hay una semilla que es café terciopelo, que sirve para abonar el suelo. Y también eso funciona como fertilidad, que para el próximo año o cada año cuando se siembra, pues nos dé abundante cosecha. Y eso es lo que me ha gustado, trabajar la tierra. Y también he recibido capacitación durante cuando estudié en la secundaria. Estudié en la secundaria técnica y cómo cuidar el medio ambiente, y no solo producir en el campo, sino que también reforestar, porque eso es lo más importante. Cuidar los árboles, porque dependemos de ahí cada día. Y cuidar las semillas criollas, que son originales de nuestros ancestros. Eso es lo más importante, ya que actualmente están promoviendo mucho las semillas transgénicas, pero lo acaba la semilla criolla. Y lo que estamos haciendo como familia, como grupo, pues es llevar a cabo el trueque. Si ya alguien ya no tiene semilla, pues igual pues darle esa semilla para que pueda producir. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo aquí en Chiapas, y pues eso es lo que les quiero compartir, y cuidar el agua, porque es el número 1 para sobrevivir, mejor calidad de agua.
Gracias, Francisco. Thank you so much. Well, we already have a theme going here with seed keeping and the importance of listening to the lessons from our ancestors and how to do that and how to share seeds. I love it. Something I'm also very into, so love hearing about that. Next up, Chenae, you have described, we're going to shift gears a little bit. You have described Mashun building, and we're going to need you to describe what that is. But you've described it as a way of mending relationships broken by colonization between your people, the land, and the water. How does this practice connect to current struggles such as water crises, pipeline conflicts, and rights disputes? So first of all, what is Mashun building, and then how does it connect to these broader issues?
So in the Shinnecock language, Mashun essentially translates to a dugout canoe, a dugout vessel. There's different dialects in our region, in the northeastern region, whether they say mushun or mishun, but it essentially translates to a dugout canoe. And so where that really I look at it now today, because when we have these Mashun burns, they go for several days. You have a log, you fall the tree, you burn the log, and that log, is hollowed out, burned out, and used with different techniques to do it. And you have to have, a certain amount of people that can oversee this this project. And so you don't really sleep, you're in shifts. But what it does is it truly brings the community together, to do that. It's not just a one person job here, it's the community. And what I've been able to do, along with some of my relatives here in the Northeast, is some of them we open to public. And some of them we have some of our partnering organizations or our allies to come and we hold conversations. And what happens is, we're teaching people about carbon neutral vessels, sustainability in the ocean. And that in itself, there's so much education around it because, there's a lot of new terms that we're seeing in some of these quote unquote green spaces, regenerative, renewal, but all of these are true ancient practices. And so when they can come and see and experience that, they're learning from us and there's a reciprocity within that. The Mashun that we were able to burn last year, where it really comes into place is a lot of people like myself, that is a canoe maker, a Mashun maker, we're contacted by many institutions. And these institutions want us to burn a canoe for exhibit, not for real use. It's usually just for exhibit. And so I kind of really been heartbroken because I spend, 7 days, no sleep, paddling in this for its maiden voyage. And then it goes to a museum that I just get to go and bring people to see. And we don't get to really make it a part of our living culture. So the museum, I sort of negotiated with them. I said, this is great. We would be more than welcome to make a vessel for your exhibit, but we also need one for us too. So we were able to get 2 vessels created out of this project. And so there's a reciprocity that comes into place there. There's the access benefit sharing that we need to be able to see from these larger institutions, so that not only we can have a seat at the table in conversation about sustainability, clean water initiatives, but really so that we can come back into our own traditional communities and we can teach these ways, but also continue to preserve this art. So you have the vessel itself that's made, but you also have the care that has to be made afterwards. You have to submerge it, you have to pitch the holes up, sink it, and then resurface it from the water in the springtime right about now and utilize that vessel because it's a living vessel. So to me, that's really where we see the interconnectedness and the wovenness specifically today is around, carbon neutral vessel making, but just also community gathering around the vessel itself. And now the negotiation, as artists, we would love to make things for exhibit, for education, but we don't want to just see our traditional items in exhibition. We need to use them. And so there needs to be support around that. And so that's where we see that reciprocity.
Thank you, Chenae. That is so beautiful and holistic in your approach to working with your community. on Moskehtu building. Thank you so much for sharing. Ian, you're up next. I've had the good fortune of visiting Ian and his wife, Aimee, at Nanawaye Farm. And so I know that one of the things that you and Aimee are doing and are doing in collaboration with the community is bringing many different elements of revitalizing Choctaw culture and lifeways into your relationships with Mother Earth as you take on the responsibilities of being good stewards of the land and waters where you live. I was wondering if you could describe the importance of Choctaw Numpa, of Choctaw language, or other cultural aspects in your efforts.
Certainly. So as you go deeper into culture, yeah, it's about all of these connections. It's connection with the land, with the ancestors, with traditional knowledge, with traditional science, and with language. Language is a really key part of that because language codes our thoughts. It doesn't matter what language you speak, English, Spanish, Choctaw. It conveys meaning, but it also helps to frame the way that you think about things. So Choctaw language is a threatened language. There are probably 8,000 to 10,000 speakers in the world, probably only about 300 in Oklahoma. The most threatened parts of the language tend to be things that have to do with traditional culture, native plants, traditional arts, these types of things. So as we do our work at Non-Awaya, we also work to learn and bring back the words for all of these different life forms that we interact with, the different processes that we do that are a part of that. And that brings life to the community on so many levels because language connects with so many different things, but it also helps us to learn more too. The Choctaw language is particularly descriptive. So if you know the Choctaw name for a plant, often that tells you a little bit of the cultural knowledge about that plant that may be sleeping. You know, I'll give an example. One of the plants that we have on our farm, we call it the Chuck Norris of the prairie. It's Monarda punctata, spotted bee balm. It's this beautiful native wildflower that will move into disturbed areas and hold the soil until other native plants can come in. So it's a tough, good guy. The Choctaw name for it is Shonshi Atoba, and it means bug manufactory. And it's called that because it's such a great pollinator plant. When you are working to restore the land and that plant comes out there, you can just hear the hum of the bumblebees out on the landscape. It's amazing. Another plant that's really cool is, it's called Tokil in the Choctaw language. In English, it's called sensitive briar. It's in the Monarda family. It's this beautiful legume. It helps to heal the soil. It's got these beautiful flowers that are great for pollinators. And then it's got these compound leaves. They look like this. And when you touch them, they close just like this to protect the plant. The Choctaw name for that plant means to squint. So that lets you know that the Choctaw ancestors thought about that plant and its leaves as being like eyes and eyelashes. And when they close, it's the plant squinting. So, I mean, what's a cooler connection with a plant than realizing that it squints when you touch it?
I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Ian. All right, so we're going to move on to another round of questions. So let's see, back to Mónica. Mónica, you are one of the founding members of the Indigenous Kinship Circle. Could you tell us more about what you have gained by being in kinship with Indigenous people across Turtle Island, as well as maybe a little bit about what the Indigenous Kinship Circle is, what you've gained from being in that kinship, and then have you learned or accomplished things through those relationships, through those kinships that you've been able to bring back to your community? Are you with us, Mónica?
Sorry. Big questions. I just want to start, with the Indigenous Kinship Circle, I guess, and what it is it is we're just a group of people that have really started looking at reconnecting with across Turtle Island with our Indigenous knowledge and what it means in terms of the grasslands and reconnecting with all of the grasslands and the places and the people and that Indigenous knowledge. So being part of that, I guess one thing that it has really taught me is that I don't know anything. When we first were challenged to do this, it was from a land, what are they called now? Land acknowledgement. And I wanted to list all of the tribal partners that were part of what we were calling the Central Grasslands Roadmap. And it covered three of the countries, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And in that, I started realizing, as an Indigenous person, so much was taken from us that we didn't even know our own relatives. I didn't know half of the tribes that originally occupied these areas. And so in the land acknowledgement, I listed, I think, 150 tribes, missing several of the tribes that were originally in part of that landscape. And were part of the trade routes and, all of the ecosystem that was in place back in the day. And so it made me realize, I don't know a lot, and really was on the learning curve to begin learning. And what motivated me to continue to be part of that and to continue to do that is that we have a voice, and a voice that needs to be heard. And we have, without hearing that, people like me don't know a lot of our own relatives, don't know a lot of the plants, don't know a lot of the landscapes, don't know the trading that happened in the past, and all of that. So Indigenous Kinship Circle has provided that opportunity to learn from others and to hear from others, and to also say, one of the things that someone said is, we are still here. We want people to know that, and we want people to know our relationship that we have to these spaces. And I think that's what being a big part of Indigenous Kinship Circle has taught me, is to think deeper and to really acknowledge the people and the places and the uniqueness and the stories and the knowledge that is there. But also in this day and age, it has also taught, how do we protect those stories? How do we make sure that those stories that are our stories don't get out to people or to entities or whatever that we don't want them to be to? And, so it really became, how do we share the knowledge amongst ourselves, but how do we also protect that knowledge and make sure that it stays within us and the purpose? And just like, Ian shared with the name of the plants and the relationship that they have to people, those are the kind of things that have come up. And then when we talk about 3 countries with Indigenous Kinship Circle, we're talking about language and the knowledge. And, I just think of one of our members that is originally from Mexico, is a professor, and has researched his own past and found out that his relationship to maize was, his family was one of the first families that began producing the seed and transmitting the seed so that maize or corn looks like it does today. It came from a grass. And that was just so powerful that he didn't know that about himself and his family and those connections. And then to be able to research that and find that, and to acknowledge that just us among the Indigenous Kinship Circle raise those questions and encourage that curiosity of finding out your own place and your own things and your own connections. So that was really something that Indigenous Kinship Circle has brought back to me, and that I have taken back to the community, is really identifying and knowing and beginning to expand your knowledge to other nations, other people across Turtle Island.
Thank you so much, Mónica. All right. So next up, Francisco. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how climate change is impacting coffee production or other agricultural endeavors that you're involved in, and how are you and your community adapting to that?
El cambio climático aquí en Chiapas, como somos productores de café orgánico, las comunidades o los productores sí pues nos están afectando directo el cambio climático en cuanto a la producción de café. Hoy en día es temporada de cosecha de café y hace un mes, pues una semana cayó el frío y todas las plantitas de café cayeron las hojas y nada más quedó puro fruto. Y sin las hojas, pues ya no se maduran bien y ya salen, pues ya se cosecha así granos secos, pero ya no es de calidad. Como mencioné hace rato, producción de café orgánico, pues necesitamos café de calidad. No podemos aplicar productos químicos, pero sí productos naturales que elaboramos nosotros para no contaminar a las matas de café y tampoco el medio ambiente y tampoco el suelo. ¿Y cómo lo estamos enfrentando? Pues cambiando también variedades de café resistente a la roya, resistente a la broca y también pues resistente al cambio climático, porque nosotros es nuestra fuente de ingreso económico para nuestras familias. Es el número uno en producción de café, pues eso es lo que producimos cada año. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo aquí con los productores de Tseltal en Yomolatel. Y pues estamos cuidando de esa parte, pero también como cultivamos bajo sombra, todas las parcelas, hay diversificación de sombra de café. Eso también ayuda porque no le afecta directamente a las plantas de café. Por hectáreas manejamos de 100 a 120 árboles de sombra de café. Y pues eso también, hay un equilibrio pues de la clima, pero pues a eso estamos. Estamos haciendo viveros frutales y maderables para reforestar las parcelas y también lo que estamos cuidando más es los árboles nativos de la región. Pues los árboles nativos pues crecen solos, pues lleva años, pues de 25, 30 años, depende de variedad, y eso es lo que también, pues cada reunión, asambleas con los productores, siempre mencionamos de cuidar los árboles, de cuidar el agua, porque ahí dependemos cada uno. También lo más importante, aquí en Yomolatel, en relación a lo del cambio climático, se aproxima 3 de mayo, que es la fiesta de Santa Cruz. Es como hay una unión y relación con la madre naturaleza, pues darle ofrenda a la madre naturaleza. Tenemos nuestra fiesta de Santa Cruz, como Yomolatel, somos como 40 trabajadores y nos reunimos ese día, 3 de mayo, pues para convivir con la madre naturaleza, pedir licencia de que también nos reciba y también cómo podemos trabajar libremente, porque siempre visitamos a las comunidades, visitamos a las socios que son de café o de productores de miel y grupo de mujeres que también elaboran jabón con miel. Y también hay esa relación de ir a las comunidades directamente, de atender sus necesidades. Y cómo también eso se pasa en el altar y pues de esa forma damos ofrenda a la Santa Cruz. Siempre cada 3 de mayo nos reunimos con Yomolatel. Es momento de convivencia y no solo de ahí, como experiencia personal, también en mi familia lo hago lo hacemos más bien la fiesta de Santa Cruz de una forma de agradecer familiarmente y pues que no nos haga falta la alimentación, que no nos haga falta las semillas, pues los árboles, el agua y la tierra, pues ahí todo se pide. Eso se llama pedir la licencia, pues primero la madre tierra, pues hay que darle esa ofrenda. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo aquí en Yomolatel, pues junto con los principales, nos guían los principales, porque ellos tienen más conexión directo con la madre tierra y con los animales silvestres, las aves, las plantas, y qué bonito cuando tengamos un jardín en nuestras casas, como eso también nos devuelve la vida, y también como nosotros también a la hora de reforestar, hijo, sembrar una mata de árbol, pues también eso pues nos cambia la vida y también la tierra pues se siente contenta. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo aquí en Yomolatel y también pues a otras familias, pues para que juntas y juntos pues luchemos para las futuras generaciones. Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you, Francisco. That's so beautiful. I'm loving hearing from all of you about all the connections across communities and with Mother Earth, and how hard you're all working to maintain those, to enrich those, to increase biodiversity. It's really beautiful. I've noted in the chat some folks who may have joined a little late and didn't know that we have simultaneous interpretation. We do have that available. There's some helpful hints replied there in the chat, so please look for that. We do have interpretation between English and Spanish. So please check that out if you need it. All right, so Chenae, I want to ask you, how does collaboration with neighboring tribes or neighboring Native nations, for example, in accessing suitable old growth trees for the Moshun, how does this strengthen, how does collaboration strengthen this rekindling process on a more regional scale? And in what ways are children and youth being included in the transmission of this knowledge?
Yes, well, I want to first say that I think today we have this we have been assimilated, unfortunately, to believe that there is categories of tribes in our regions. In the Northeast, because of our history dating back to time immemorial, we are so deeply interwoven that we make up what's called the Ninamasinawank or Anishinaabeg, which is the family, the people of these lands. And so we're separated in many different ways, whether we're federally recognized, state recognized, historically recognized. And so when we're able to come together, we're able to really see that there really aren't that many differences between us. Geographically, perhaps, right? So if Shinnecock or, our tribes in Long Island are right along the coast, if you were to come up to Sudbury, Mass, where I did a Moshun burn with Hartman Dietz from Mashpee Wampanoag and Andre from the Nipmuc community, the geographical terrain is vastly different, right? You're a little further western Massachusetts. However, when you look at the waterways and how we were able to travel to one another, you're seeing that there really isn't much of a difference there. So when we're able to come together, we're able to sort of share these puzzle pieces, between us, which is super important because even, some people will say, well, I had a grandmother that actually was born up here or lived here, or, we're sort of really rekindling those kinships, legitimately. Now, when it comes to the utilitarian materials, such as bark for our We2 homes, cedar saplings for the inside of our homes or the outside of our homes, being able to harvest those things, that really changes not just because of our tribal footprint, but because of the colonization that has also taken place to the land. In Long Island, those tulip poplar trees, they're sort of few and far to hard to find. You don't really see the large, 28-foot in diameter, anywhere from 10 to 17-foot long trunks that are good enough to be able to make a traditional dugout canoe just to hold 3 to 4 people, maybe 2. You're not really seeing that much in Long Island. However, in like Western Massachusetts or Western Connecticut, you are starting to see some of those. But then what also happens is the tribes have access to that land. That becomes a whole thing within itself. We might hold the knowledge on how to practice these lifeways and sustain these lifeways, but unfortunately, due to colonization, we don't have access. So what happens with us machine makers is we communicate. So I can make a phone call to my Mashpee teacher, Darius Coombs, and say, hey, Darius, I'm having a hard time, tracking down a log, and he has relationships within his location, maybe not on his tribal, lands there of what's today, but he has relationships with local loggers. And so I have relationships with local loggers and, logging companies within Long Island. And so we're able to kind of communicate with one another to make sure that we can pull the resources together. Same thing with, upstate, like Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts. If we need a certain amount of cedar poles, we communicate with our Nipmuc relatives to be able to spend a week in there, harvest the poles, strip the poles, put them on like, a flatbed and bring them on a ferry over to Long Island. And we are able to, be able to give a vast amount of quahog shells for those wampum makers that are making wampum beads to make their belts and things like that. So we essentially do a lot of trade between resources. Those that practice these lifeways, we trade seeds, obviously different knowledge, and we also roll up our sleeves and give a hand. That's something that we try to, it's almost it's a full on economy within it. It's an industry that essentially that we have reclaimed, is our machine building. We've reclaimed that, and we trade, materials and things for. So what I see is that when those individuals, or even myself and others, go to those territories into their community, to maybe tribal members that are not, this is something that they're just starting to remember, it becomes something that is a gift for them too, because they're like, wow, we didn't know that, that you use a tulip poplar tree. We didn't know that there's access to these trees here in Long Island, and so it's you're beginning to kind of pull those resources together and create this bundle of knowledge, that our communities can have access to. But it really is founded on our relationships with one another.
Thank you so much, Chenae. So much wisdom in what you've shared about the work that you're doing. Really appreciate that. Ian, so you wrote about, in your article, you wrote about living with a native landscape being kind of a teacher in its own way. And you wrote, I loved this sentence, like a tribal elder, sometimes it can be harsh in showing us just how much we have left to learn, but the land has done more for us than we've done for it. And I have to say, I laughed out loud when I read that, because I've experienced in my own journey of trying to learn our language, Choctaw and Numpa, I've experienced a little bit of that harshness from the elders trying to put me in my right place. So that one made me chuckle. But I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit and share with us maybe one of those lessons learned the hard way.
Sure. Sure. There are countless examples. Indigenous culture is one side of the coin. Native landscapes are the other side of the coin. And when you don't have one or the other, it doesn't survive on its own for very long. They require each other. So as you're working to restore parts of culture that may be sleeping, if you can tie that in with restoring the native landscape, it makes it a synergy so that it's more valuable than either one of it by itself, because you're revitalizing the whole. As a part of the effort to do that, we live on a native landscape that we've been working to restore for the past decade. It had lots of abuse in the past. It had been logged, it had been overgrazed for years, it had been eroded. but fortunately, most of it had not been replanted with invasive plants. So we wanted to change that landscape to conditions where it could heal. And in our area, southeastern Oklahoma, one of the keystone species is bison. So we'd raised bison for a little while where we lived previously. We wanted to bring them onto our current landscape where our house is and use them in a way that could restore that land. So that's not something that we had done before per se. So we went to the most knowledgeable people that we could find. At the time, it seemed like that was the folks that do mob grazing, holistic pasture management, that type of thing. We went to classes on it. We had the instructor come out and help us plan out our system. You know, it looked like we were going to be able to have 40 animals on our land. It looked like within 2 years, it was going to be restored to this beautiful landscape. And so we set up and did all that, and that is not at all what happened. You know, reality and the land taught us something completely different than the best available knowledge at the time. I could talk about it for days, but the most important lesson learned was that the system that was recommended to us is set up for the dominant grasses in our area, which happen to be invasive grasses that are planted there specifically because they can take a lot of abuse from overgrazing. What we found is that to get the native grasses reestablished, we had to give the plants a whole lot more rest time. And we had to time the grazing to the specific timing of the plants, when they go to seed, when they do their most growth, when they're dormant. So it's not just a formulaic approach based on we're going to graze every 40 days. It's an approach that is more based on, okay, we can graze in the dormant season. We can graze when the plants are growing fast in our area up until July 4th. And then if we want them to set seeds and expand, we can't graze them again until the frost in November. So it's a lot more complicated than just a formulaic approach. You have to really think about what the land is trying to teach you. That could have been a very harsh lesson. You know, we could have quit our day jobs and jumped in full head on in the first 2 years, and we would have utterly failed if we'd done that because the land had other lessons to teach us. Another lesson that we get often is working with the bison. You know, we'll get ready to go out of town and do something, and we'll look out and there they are in the wrong pasture, that kind of thing. It's like, man, now we got to go build fence. We got to go figure out why they're out, what's motivating them, all that kind of stuff. So the land always has something new to teach us.
Thank you, Ian. Those are some really important lessons, especially the importance of listening to the land, and also to the bison. They definitely have minds of their own, much more so than domesticated cattle or something like that. So that's really interesting. And that's a good segue too, back to Mónica for the next question. Mónica, in the first question, you told us a great story, a bit about how you and your family started to define what food sovereignty means to you. But I know you, and I know that you are doing a lot in this arena. So I want to give you an opportunity, if you'd like, to share a bit more about what that looks like for you and your community, and maybe a little bit about the work with bison. And then thinking about all of that work that you and your community, your nation are doing, do you have any advice that you would give to other Indigenous peoples, nations, and communities who are working toward food sovereignty?
Thank you, Aimee. I guess, a story I want to share is about what I have learned in my journey, and through practice and failure and try again, just is the lessons learned. And one of the stories that I have found is that we have what we call a chokecherry, and I don't know where all it grows in the United States and Canada, and if it grows in Mexico, but we use this chokecherry in its medicine. But it becomes medicine through the way that we process it and preserve it. And what we do is we pick the chokecherry, and it's a small cherry with a fairly large pit and not much meat on it. But we process that, and we gather it, and we pound it. And we pound it with the seed in it yet. And by doing that, we're taking that seed has natural poisons in it, I guess you would say. The arsenic is in the seed and the pit, and we're taking it and we're leaving that in the with the fruit and the meat inside of the chokecherry. So we pound it all together, and then we take that chokecherry pounding and we make it a patty, and then that patty is put out to dry. And what we have learned from our ancestors, and I don't know how long it took them to learn this, but it takes that which was naturally occurring poisons and turns it into a medicine. By the sun leaches out all of those, all of that poison and turns it into, and it maintains the, it's very high in antioxidants. And we had a youth member of one of the tribes in Wyoming, I believe it was, done her study on it and proved that these chokecherry patties, when they were done this way, proved to be medicine that fought cancer. And I thought, how brilliant our ancestors were and how connected they were, that they could take this and learn this and utilize this process, and then we would have medicine throughout the year. And so when I think about that, I think about just connections and observation and learning and storytelling. And, those are part of the seasons that we had as a regular lifeway, that we had seasons where we had storytelling, and we had seasons where we had preparation, and we had, just being really mindful and connected to those. And part of that also is the learning from the bison or the buffalo. Most tribes still continue to call them buffalo, and utilizing that. And so one of the things that we do in learning from the bison is that there is those connections with the bison, as they talked about with the grasses, and the bison would basically restore some of those grasses and restore the waterways that were there. They knew how to find those and bring the water back. And we were just able to utilize that. And we didn't go through what now is today is food diseases. Like a large native population has diabetes. And that is mainly a food problem that we have. And it's because of the assimilation and the colonization and the oppression and the removal and the taking of that knowledge. But when we look at bringing the bison back and we look at how it adapted and was part of, is indigenous to this and evolved in this area, just like we did as an indigenous people, and how bringing that back has a lot of hope, and a lot of hope in terms of erasing a lot of these food diseases that we have, and also bringing us back as people about the decision making about the land processes. We have been removed from a lot of that, through allotment and through colonization and different things like that. So the opportunity to bring bison back is also a way for our people to be part of the decision making around land processes and food, and good healthy food that our bodies need and require and have been missing. And to have those back is really really important, and to learn those lessons and to learn those ways and to make those reconnections is just provides a lot of hope, I guess, and so any advice that I'd want to share is that one is we got to learn to listen to the stories and really acknowledge the elders that are bringing that forward, and also listen to those that maybe aren't elder yet, but have been practicing things and have learned things and have done things on their own. And to really recognize that and not think of it as competitive, but think of it as a way to share that knowledge and to learn and to make our families and our communities and our tioshbes, a lot stronger than they have been. And then the other thing is just to remember those cycles. Those cycles, there's times when we were taught that we harvest chinchasha. And chinchasha is the tobacco that we use in our pipes. And when we should harvest that. And that's to ensure that the chinchasha grows forever, that our future generations have it and those type of things. So I think that the other advice that I would have is just remember the seasons and recall and learn those seasons and when they are to be taken into consideration. And then the last thing, I guess, is I heard it mentioned here is how do we adapt today to the things that we're faced with that maybe our ancestors didn't have. And one of those I can think of right now, we're having extreme fires, we're having extreme heat, we're in a drought. And, how do we adapt to the climate change? And how do we recognize that? And how do we adapt our processes to that? And I think one way is ensuring that our schools, especially our local schools, our tribal schools, that the children are learning these seasons and learning the changes and that they can be as resilient as the ancestors were, because climate change is not new. It might be faster and it might be harder today, but they had to deal with it. And so I think that's what I would share is, that's how do we adapt and how do we keep intact those practices and those ways that are so important to us.
Thank you so much, Mónica. Some deep, deep wisdom there. Thank you for sharing and hearing lots of connections across the panelists. I know Ian has done a lot of similar work too, and I've for ages been wanting to bring the two of you into discussion together. So I'm so glad this is happening. I'm going to go to Francisco next. So Francisco, you participated in January, as I mentioned before, in a gathering that Cultural Survival co-hosted with the Indigenous Resilience Center that's based at the University of Arizona. That gathering was inspired, at least in part, by my experience with the Indigenous Kinship Circle that Mónica was speaking about and that we're in together. Where we've really realized the importance of rekindling these kinship and trade routes, information exchange across larger geographies than we've been able to due to colonization, where we now have a nation-state border that not only makes it more difficult for us to have these exchanges between communities in the US versus communities in Mexico or even Canada, but also has even divided communities by drawing the line right through their communities. And so the idea behind that gathering was to kind of break down some of those barriers, to bring people together, to learn from each other. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the experience you had at the gathering. Was there something that you certainly brought a lot and shared a lot that I know everyone appreciated, some of which you're sharing today. But could you share a little bit about your experience and maybe something that you learned from the other participants or new connections you made that you were able to bring back to your community and your work? Perdón, Francisco, you're on mute.
Cierto, tuvimos un encuentro de intercambio de saberes indígenas sobre agricultura regenerativa, gracias a Guardianes de la Tierra en Oaxaca, Vero, y a Cultural Survival Resiliense. Pues agradezco profundamente esta oportunidad donde nos reunimos más de 40 personas en Maní, Mérida, Yucatán. Pues hubo un encuentro México, Arizona y Estados Unidos. Pues sí, me gustó mucho la experiencia que se compartió de las compañeras, de los compañeros. Eso es lo que también nos ayuda muchísimo como familia, como organizaciones. Es de alguna forma, de esa forma podemos compartir nuestras experiencias, porque retroalimentamos de lo que ya estamos haciendo, como también nosotros como Yomolatel, como vamos en el tercer nivel, producción, procesamiento, comercialización, hasta en cafetería, o sea, con producción de café orgánico. Y hay compañeros que ahí van avanzando. Eso es lo que necesitan más acompañamiento. Pues durante el encuentro, pues se compartió muchas cosas de las experiencias que tenemos. Y lo más importante es de que no solo fue teórico, sino que también se vio experiencias en el campo o ahí en la escuela donde se llevó a cabo, Escuela de Agricultura. Y, y las compañeras, pues, los compañeros, pues igual se sintieron a gusto de adquirir estos conocimientos. A veces conocemos diferentes productos, pero es diferente cuando se comparte en lo personal y se vea en foto y ya se conoce, ¿no? Pues lo que más me llamó la atención también ahí en la Escuela de Agricultura, vimos experiencias, eh, pues hay cosas o hay semillas que tenemos en nuestras regiones. Por ejemplo, el café, nosotros le llamamos aquí café terciopelo. El café terciopelo es la semilla. Hace rato mencioné que es bueno para fertilidad del suelo y también para alimentación de los animales. Y eso es lo que hay que fortalecer y hay que conservar esas semillas. Pues con lo que compartieron los compañeros, pues lo que también me llamó la atención es importante tomar fotos, videos, porque a la hora de ir a nuestras comunidades, pues de esa forma podemos compartir lo que también las otras compañeras o compañeros pues nos compartieron. Y eso es lo que yo hice. Aquí en Yomolatel tenemos más de 200 productores. Está dividido por 11 regiones. De las 11 regiones tenemos que ir a una reunión, a una asamblea general con los productores, de compartir de lo que se llevó a cabo en Maní, Mérida, Yucatán. Lo que más les gustó, de acuerdo a las experiencias de las fotos, es el pozo profundo. Sabemos que aquí en Chiapas hay pendientes desde 700 a 1500 sobre el nivel del mar o más, pero con los productores hay algunas familias que carecen de agua potable. Consumen agua recolectando la lluvia con rotoplas. Y en la tercera reunión, tercera asamblea, es donde nos recalcaron, nos marcaron de que no, es muy importante lo del pozo profundo. Pues es más mejor calidad de agua que se pueda tomar ahí, porque agua de la lluvia, pues puede ser que esté ácido o algo, ¿no? Y eso sería el otro punto. Y como otro tema más importante es sobre producción de cerdos. Aquí la mayoría de las familias chiapanecas producen cerdos, tienen sus animales de traspatio, pero nada más ahí producen, engordan y así. Pero el punto más importante es el gas letano, que se puede producir gas letano. Aquí las familias consumen mucha leña para preparar los alimentos en la cocina. Por eso a veces hay deforestación, hay tala de árboles. Pero pues con estas experiencias, lo del gas metano, pues se puede experimentar con algunas familias de aquí de Chiapas. De esa forma podemos contribuir, pues ya no talar el árbol. Pues eso es lo que también les llamaron la atención. Y también, pues lo que ya se platicó, pues al intercambiar las experiencias, pues aprendemos muchas cosas. Por ejemplo, sobre producción de la milpa colectiva. Cada familia aquí en Chiapas todavía conservan las semillas criollas. Eso es lo más importante de los ancestros. Cómo de generación en generación vamos a ir cuidando las semillas, porque dependemos de ellas. Pues es nuestra sangre. La alimentación es nuestra sangre. Y eso es lo que la gente también lo cuidan y trabajan a diario. Y las parcelas lo dejan descansar 2 a 3 años para que se recupere la fertilidad del suelo. Y ya al segundo o tercer año vuelven a rozar y hacer la milpa para no también maltratar el suelo. Hay que dejar descansar 2, 3 años y para poder cultivar y así, y vayan creciendo los árboles y nuevamente como fertilidad. Y eso es lo que se está haciendo aquí con las familias, pues se sienten contentos de saber pues, estas experiencias, es algo nuevo y que se pueda poner en práctica en cada familia y pues ojalá los que nos están viendo, pues que nos apoyen para llevar a cabo este proyecto y pues, les agradecemos mucho y agradezco a la directora Aimee. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Francisco, and we're grateful to you and all the knowledge you shared as well. Just like a bit more context about what Francisco's sharing about, while we gathered, we met at a regenerative agricultural school in Mani, Yucatan, and they just had an incredible way of the way they were raising the pigs. They had a biocomposter and were able to generate the methane gas through this relatively simple but sophisticated system where they could then use the gas for cooking. It was really amazing. So when we think about like holistic approaches to regenerative agriculture, it was just an amazing example. All right, so we're gonna move to you, Chenae. So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can expand a bit more because I think it's a really important topic. When you and your community worked together to create a mashun that was then commissioned by the museum you mentioned, you were able to challenge the Western notion of exhibits as representations of the past rather than living cultures. So you've touched on that a bit, but I'm wondering if you could expand on how did that experience allow you to assert the continued presence of your people, and what has been the impact of that on your community?
Yes. Well, I will start kind of, with Indigenous people. We're big storytellers. So I'll say that, when I got the call, it's the Long Island Children's Museum. Just for reference, it's on Long Island. It is the largest attended museum in Long Island, so that encompasses all kinds of museums on Long Island. It is the most visited. in Long Island Children's Museum. And they have a huge project called the Saltwater Works exhibit. And this exhibit not only just focuses on, the Moshun, but it's really teaching children that Long Island is an actual island surrounded by ocean. And, it's a very interactive exhibit. And for years they were, I guess, trying to get a hold of me. So I was probably somewhere off in the ocean paddling, which is why they couldn't get in touch with me. But lo and behold, they were able to track me down. We had a meeting and they said, we heard and we've seen your work and we wanted you to, produce a canoe for the exhibit that children could get in. And immediately, I don't know why it just triggered me. Maybe because I've worked in museums, for a long time. And I've since left museums about maybe 8 years ago. But I just remember like people just coming in and it's just like they just have this idea that specifically Native people on the East Coast are a historic thought, right? It's like something in the past. So they're going to get in these canoes and they're going to pretend and they're just going to go, woo, 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 and they're just going to only talk about Native people in the Northeast around Thanksgiving. And that's that. And so like right when they had said that, I was just like, I don't know about that. Like immediately, I just, kindly just said, I don't know if I'm comfortable with making another Moshun that I have to now watch die because the vessel is living. From the time the tree's fallen, the tree has to be alive. It can't be a dead tree. The tree's alive. We put offerings out for that tree. We feast with that tree. We tobacco that tree. We ask permission, and we do it the right way, even if it's in a modern way that you have to cut it down, or wherever that log comes from. We spend time with it. Then we see the boat, we see the Moshun before we do it. And then we actually create it and craft it. Those thoughts are coming to us from creation and to manifestation. We are manifesting those thoughts that come to us, and that vessel is created. And then after all of that relationship that's built with that living tree, we give it to a museum and we never get to see it. And we have to pay whatever tickets, we can to go and see it. That just didn't feel right to continue to do. I've done it for, at the time it was called Plymouth Plantation, known today as Patuxet Plymouth at Patuxet. I've made numerous amount of Moshuns. I was a part of making one that hadn't been done in over 400 years for the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, but when it is taken out of the water and not being used, it cracks. Then it can't be used anymore because of the heating and cooling, the moisture in the air, the dryness of the air. That just, you can't take a living vessel and put it in a museum. So I said to them, well, how about we do a 2-for-1? So, reach back into your grant applications list and donor list and see what they would do. And immediately they contacted me within weeks. And they said, we have a donor that, a few donors that actually want to see this happen. So I was able to we really made 3 Moshuns within the year, but one was for a different museum, a mini Moshun that we can take as an educational piece. But that first one is on exhibit in the Long Island Children's Museum. It's amazing. The youth were able to be a part of that. And the second one was gifted to me because a lot of us Moshun makers don't even have our own Moshun. Like, believe it or not, we don't. And so it was gifted to me to be able to use for the purpose of our canoe journeys that we do, for the purpose of our ceremonies that we still do, our water ceremonies, but also for the purpose of being able to take people out on a Moshun, because it's a very different experience than just paddling in an actual canoe. And so this is a living Moshun that is still alive. And so that one was done in September. We were able to bring, the donors, the president of the museum, the faculty and curator, all to be able to experience this immersive experience. and other allies that we work with within Long Island. And so I think it really just takes speaking up, not being afraid, and also just knowing sometimes they don't really know. You know, they don't. They see something that's beautiful, and they want to help to preserve the culture, and they think sometimes keeping it in a museum and telling the story and having you a part of telling that story is preserving it, but they're not realizing that we are still utilizing these very same lifeways, and we're trying to revitalize them. So that I think that, you know, that was a set precedence, because after that first Mashun in Long Island Children's Museum, I had a ton of museums in Long Island reaching out to me. And so, you know, that is pretty much our, like, myself and one other cultural steward, his name is Shane Weeks. We work together to, in shifts, to do these Mashuns until we can get more young people that are interested in staying up for more than, you know, 3 or 4 days. We have made the agreement that that is going forward, the agreement, you know, with museums. And we'll leverage our relationships and resources to make sure that it becomes affordable to these museums. But for every one we make, we make one too. So hopefully within the next 3 or 4 years, whatever Mashuns are on exhibit, we have an equivalent amount within our own cultural fleet of Mashuns to be able to utilize within our community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chenae. That's such important work. All right, we're going to rapidly run out of time here. I suspected that might happen. There's so many things to discuss, but we do have time for one more question for Ian. In your article, you describe how you're partnering with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma to share with our people and others about the work, ecological restoration, cultural revitalization that has been possible due to your relationship with the land and other beings that call Nana Hawaii Farm home. Could you share more about this collaboration with Choctaw Nation and how it has been mutually beneficial?
Certainly. So my day job is Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Choctaw Nation. I work with a wonderful team of community members to protect our historic sites and our sacred places. A lot of that work is dictated by federal law. It's compliance type work. It has to follow a certain path and stay within certain boundaries. However, also in my role as Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, I have a responsibility to help the community to keep traditional Indigenous culture alive, and also to work to revitalize parts of it that might be sleeping. Nana Hawaii Farm is what my wife and I do in our hours away from the tribe. We both work for the tribe, but it's something that's a lot more connected with the land than things that you can do with the tribe. So for example, we had to put down one of our bison this weekend, which was, you know, not intended. It's not what we wanted to do, but we had to. And in doing that, we don't just take it to a butcher. I mean, we use this. This is a stone-bladed knife. This knife skinned and processed the bison this weekend along with another one. That would be really hard for the tribe to do in terms of liability and scheduling and things like that. We have a lot more flexibility. So when we do stuff like that, we bring community out, and it's not just processing a bison, but it's doing it with stone tools, just like it was 1,000 years ago. Similarly, in connecting with the land, there are almost infinite opportunities. Choctaw Nation, probably a lot of listeners don't know, is the third largest federally recognized tribe in the United States, over 230,000 tribal members. So it has a wide audience for community and Indigenous people. When we partner with the tribe, we have the opportunity to bring in people from the community that the tribe knows that we may not know, to experience the opportunity of learning from the land at Nana Hawaii. So we bring in like the tribe's youth advisory board. We bring in tribal foster families. We bring in Yapali, which is a group sponsored by the tribe that focuses on culture to help women to lead healthier lives and their families to lead healthier lives. We take them out. They don't just meet the bison, but we take them on plant walks. They learn about the deep culture of the land. They learn about traditional food, all of these types of things. My favorite thing that we do every year is we host Choctaw Nation's Indigenous Immersion Camp. And that's a camp, there's no application for it, but the participants are aged 18 to 22. They come from our community and they've been identified by elders as potential future cultural leaders. And so we take them out on the Oia farm and we connect them with the land. It's deep. It's like culture boot camp. And we bring elders out there and interact with them. We teach them as much as we possibly can about the land and the length of time that we have. And then we take them to the Choctaw homeland, and with our relationships there through Choctaw Nation's DIPO program, with all the different federal agencies, we're able to take them not just to the homeland, but to landscapes that are managed as they were by our ancestors in the past before the Trail of Tears. And we found that many of the people who participate in this program really do go on to be future cultural leaders. At one point, we had 9 of them working in cultural services for Choctaw Nation at the same time, graduates of that Indigenous camp. We also do lots of work in traditional food, deep Indigenous Choctaw food. I know time is short, but my wife was diagnosed with a form of diabetes, and we both had exposure to Choctaw food, but we changed our diet to be based around Choctaw food and other equivalents. And within 3 months, we lost 70 pounds between us, and she was out of the diabetic range. So I worked to formulate that information into a book. It's not just recipes, it's the deep relationship that our Indigenous ancestors had with the land and adapting that to the present day in a way that can help people to lead a higher quality of life. And so we can share that information on our own, but the tribe has, such a large group of people and so many connections and ties. We put the book together, but then the tribe, we donate it to the tribe and the tribe distributes it and it reaches so many more people than we possibly could. So we work to do connections with that benefit the goals of what we're doing, because that's, traditional cultural revitalization, but it also benefits the goals of the tribe by helping to improve quality of life through culture.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. I know it benefits our people so much. And the book is beautiful. I just ordered another copy of the second edition. So looking forward to that arriving any day now. Thank you all so much. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you. I did have one more question we're not going to have time for, but I think I can use it because I think many of you have already answered this. So I'm going to just reflect back a few things we've heard before we close today. And what I wanted to ask, the context is, due to climate change and political and social turmoil around the world, these are very chaotic and unsettling times that we're living in. Yet our peoples, Indigenous peoples, and specifically our ancestors, have lived through very difficult, and some might even say apocalyptic times before, due to the ravages of colonization. And so what I wanted to ask, but I think you've all touched on already, is if you could share something you're bringing forward from this ancestral intelligence, ancestral wisdom, brilliance, there's many things we could call it, but from the knowledge that our ancestors held and carried and brought forward to multiple generations has now become our responsibility to pass down to the youth, to revitalize within our communities. And we've been talking a lot today about that happens. To me, there's a lot of hope and healing in this work, not only for our peoples, but I think for humanity in general. So I just want to take a brief moment to reflect on some of the themes we've heard that I think we can, that can be shared and learned across humanity, because I do believe that Indigenous ancestral intelligence is what the world needs now, much more than we need artificial intelligence. And so we heard a lot about, what does food sovereignty mean? How do we define that for ourselves? And talked about seed keeping and ancestral practices so that we're not as dependent on, stores and commercial endeavors. We're able to sustain ourselves in community, not just for ourselves, not for our single families, but across our communities. And so the importance of those connections and really revitalizing the communal work that we do together, that we learn together, that brings us together and deepens our relationships. Even talking about carbon neutral vessels on the ocean. That's amazing, Chenae. And I think, all communities, whether they identify as indigenous or not, can be leaning into these things of building community, of really working to be in relationship with the land, with Mother Earth, with all the other beings, entities, and flows that share our homes. We heard a lot about those connections, how it's connected to culture and language, how we can learn from each other, the importance of enhancing biodiversity as we work together. The importance of helping each other to revitalize Indigenous livelihoods that are likely more carbon neutral, less extractive, and more in balance with Mother Earth and with each other. We also heard about like this synergy of how Ian talked about the synergy of the plants and the prairie, and I think it applies, across different forms of life, including humans, and how we all have an important role to play in our ecosystems. And I think that's something that if all of humanity could embrace that, we would be in a much better place and envisioning a brighter future for all of us. And that includes, paying attention, listening to Mother Earth, listening to the land and the water and the other beings that are around us, including the seasonality that Mónica mentioned, and all of these other connections and ways to get in sync with nature, with Mother Earth. So that's what I'm taking away from this. Thank you all for contributing to this conversation. Thank you to the audience who's joined us. This has been really rich, and I wish we could keep going maybe another time. So I just, again, thank you all. Hachiakoke lihoke. I'm so grateful, so honored to be here with all of you. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on kinship and foodways. If you like what you learned, what you heard today, please consider making a donation at cs.org/donate to support our work and stay informed about future events through our social media platforms. If you would like to receive our newsletter directly in your inbox and stay informed about our work supporting Indigenous communities around the world, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter by visiting the link provided in the chat, or leave your email in the chat. We'll pick it up there. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Hachi pinsa la chiki. I hope we can see you soon. If you want, you can learn more about cultural survival by visiting our website, www.cs.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and Facebook at Cultural Survival. So thank you all so much. It's been wonderful to be here with you today. And especially thank you to our panelists, not only for being here, but just the amazing work you're doing in your communities and for your willingness to share it with us and the world.